Welcome to the Comic Binge. I am your host, Paul Herman, and today I've got a very, very, very special returning guest, Anshuman of For the Love of Comic Books, which I am extremely excited to have back on and to have on a very special potential maybe semi-regular series. We'll see what happens. But anyway, if you're new to the channel, appreciate everyone who was coming on, who has subscribed recently. Appreciate everyone's support, but if you haven't already, please go and subscribe today to the Comic Binge. I'd appreciate it. We do comic books, all kinds of comic books, and we're trying to branch out besides superhero stuff, as you'll see in this episode. But we got tons of playlists of different kinds of things, like independent comic books, mainstream comic books, whatever. We've got all kinds of stuff out there, but I don't want to talk about that stuff anymore because I'm too excited to get into our topic today. But with me returning today is Anshuman of For the Love of Comics. To me, the GOAT of YouTube comic book, in my opinion. And when I say GOAT, it means the greatest of all time. So anyway, Anshuman, thank you for coming back to the Comic Binge.
Paul, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to today's episode, which is going to be a little different.
Yes. I remember. I think I tried to reach out to you. I'm not trying to put you on blast or anything, but because you're a busy guy. I think I emailed you. Yeah, right. I emailed you about this idea like a while ago, and I was like, we were talking a little bit because I like the idea. One thing I always loved about your show is that you are like, not, this is gonna be the wrong way of explaining it, but to be extremist, because I'm an extremist, you're like the anti-superhero comic book person. Not that you don't like superhero comics, but it's like that's not your thing, right? Like that's not your go-to. And you love comic books completely for a different reason than I do. And I love that because I've gone on every episode I have you on. I always tell people, but I'm telling other people basically that Anshuman got me, helped. I mean, I always like non-superhero comic books, but he helped me look out even more like, oh, this is good SH. And I, living by Fantagraphics, I was able to go and pick up stuff because of Anshuman. Help honestly give me ideas for my wife. My wife and him have very similar tastes for comic books, and so it was always a really cool idea for me because I knew you were open to superhero comics. You talked about it in other episodes you have, and if you haven't checked out his YouTube channel, please go. Great videos out there. But I always like the idea of like exchanging like ideas or having like, have you read like, or stuff you knew you had to read that you just were too lazy to read, like for instance, like for me, another good one for me is Sandman. I've read like a half of the first volume of Sandman, which I know you're probably gonna like throw things at me. And it's stupid why I haven't gone on and read it. When I'm like, I'm just gonna read this Fantastic Four comic instead. It's like I'm like almost, you know what I mean? Like it's just I'm just lazy. I like being stuck in my normalcy. But the problem is there's so many good comic books out there, and because I love the comic medium in general, right? So that's the whole point. I thought it'd be really cool is to have an idea of like make basically someone to force me to read something that I need to read. Because I wouldn't do it otherwise because I'm just too lazy. And vice versa. So anyway, Anshuman, why don't you kind of explain a little bit? I'll kind of throw it to you and kind of.
I think that's good. But I also, I'll say this is that no one can read everything, and no one has read everything, and there's definitely not this idea that there are certain things that you must read, and there's no shame in not having read stuff just because it's an ocean of stuff out there. And I'm always catching up on great things that I haven't read. But I thought, yes, this idea of sort of saying, there are a number of comics that we say, I've heard a lot about that, or I've heard people talk about that, or say these kind of things. And we kind of always have them in the back of our minds, but we, for whatever reason, we don't get them put in front of us. At the same time, there are lots of things that just come out of nowhere and get read. So we thought, I think it would be a good idea to give ourselves a sort of target and to say that let's pick a comic and each of us picked a comic that the other person hadn't read and said, I'll tell you, if you haven't read this comic, I'll tell you should read this comic. And we both picked sort of at random. And I think the way it ended up being like, wow, we both picked comics that the other one was like, yeah, that's one I've heard of, for years, if not decades.
Yeah.
And it worked out both that way as well. And I've been on your channel before, Paul, and we've talked about Kurt Busiek. We've talked about superhero comics. I mean, I do read superhero comics, but you are a superhero comic aficionado. And, I thought that I would be getting some sort of a deep cut, but instead, I'll have to admit, you kind of blew open this thing that there's this very famous comic that I haven't read, in spite of, professing to be a Spider-Man fan. There is possibly one of the most famous Spider-Man runs that is one of those comics. So I think I feel very called out by you on that as well. It's just like, I was like, of all the comics to pick, how did he pick the one, that's the big famous one that I haven't read?
That's awesome. I do. If you go back to our first show, which is our top 5 Kurt Busiek comic books, which is a great. I mean, basically, these episodes are basically an excuse for me to hang out with Angshiman, to be friends with Angshiman. That's basically what I'm just gonna throw it out there. Like, just basically an excuse for me to hang out with this guy, right? And and I was really excited because I know we both love, we love to appreciate Kurt Busiek, and everything. But when you picked Untold Tales as your number one, it blew me away because I was expecting.
I'll just say they were my top 5, but I refuse to rank them within the top 5. So yeah,
but you saved it for last. You blew me. You purposely saved it for last because I was expecting the classics, But you blew me. I already had an immense amount of respect for you before, but when you picked Untold Tales at the very end, I was like, okay, we homies. I officially we got this. So, in knowing you love Spider-Man, it felt like, I think you had mentioned either to me or on a stream or somewhere, I knew you hadn't read it, and I was like, you have to have read this. But
yeah, it's good memory on your part because, but I think as a Spider-Man fan, one can be excused because Spider-Man, like more than any other superhero, there's just so much Spider-Man out there. There've been times in which you've had like 6 series running at the same time, year after year after year. So not having read a particular arc or a particular run of Spider-Man, I think is completely acceptable. But when you said Kraven's Last Hunt, I was like, well, that's one of the big ones. And that's one of those big holes as far as my, even my, what can I say, my dilettante or my amateur fandom of Spider-Man should have covered. It's like ones that you feel like, okay, surely you got to it within your first 5 years, maybe if not as a kid, when coming back into comics, surely you read Kraven's Last Hunt. And I'm like, nope, somehow I just skipped it until you brought it up as the assignment for today's episode.
Yeah. So do you want to go with that on this now, or do you want me to go talk about your one you picked for me?
Well, I mean, I don't know how you want to do it. I wondered, this is what I thought is that what did you know? Because of course, as the title of this video says, it's Kraven's Last Hunt and Daytripper. So Daytripper is the comic that I asked you to read, and Kraven's Last Hunt is the comic you asked me to read. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what we knew before we had this conversation about these. Like, what did you know about Daytripper, or what did you think you knew about Daytripper before we had this? And I can do the same for Kraven's Last Hunt.
I love it. Yeah, I'll go here. So to be honest, I think I saw Daytripper in like the classic, Barnes and Noble, in the graphic novel section. I'd seen it like peripherally, and when you're a superhero fan and you're blowing money, like, I was gonna stare at all these single issue comic books for superheroes, whatever, you get tunnel vision with comic books, and but whenever I'm going out there and I'm always looking at, what places have or whatever, I would see it, and I would see that when you're a comic fan and you've been as a comic fan as long as I have, when you see things like Vertigo, you kind of know what to expect, kind of a thing, right? So when you see that title, that means, one, it's probably going to be mature, right? The second one is going to be artsy, probably, right? And in not probably a superhero book. So, I mean, for the most part, Swamp Thing maybe excluded, or you know, a couple exceptions.
Right.
But so it's not saying I'm like, I'm never gonna read that. I'm not doing that, but it's just not something I'm gonna be like, I need to read this. But I kept seeing it, like people talk about it, like you see like the headlines. It was something I would see kind of whatever. And I want to say, and this is not just to kiss your butt here, but I think you had gone on a lot about it on your videos that I'd watch. And you know, and as I would buy books, and as you know, since I had my daughter, basically, I got really into not just superhero books, but just the comic medium as a whole, and just really started really like, I mean, I always loved the comic medium, but like really started going beyond what I would normally be doing, right? And so it was one of those things where I started seeing Daytripper out there quite a bit, like to the point where, we'll get to that in a second here. Basically, I just see it peripherally a lot, and it was really cool to see, you know, the kind of people keep talking about it, and I was like, oh yeah, you know, and I kind of just forgot about it. So, but besides that, Angshiman, I didn't have any knowledge of this. What it's about,
right.
Nothing. I knew nothing about it.
So, you know, it's an artsy thing for mature readers from Vertigo. That was about it, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and yeah, we have a couple months, and it was, and that's the thing is like the cool thing, by the way, with Angshiman, it's like we did what, our last one back in July. It feels like a good like break of time to like check out, pick some things. So yeah, a couple months is always a good time frame because both busy.
Well, you like to get plans done ahead of time. I'm very chaotic, you know, and I've really got a lot to learn from you. Is that you're like 4 months ago, you're like, how about December 21st? And I'm like, December? I don't even know what I'm doing in October.
I'm insane. I'm insane.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's great. So yeah, you had, because I think you gave plenty of time for me to get a hold of a book and read it, and of course we had travel and family stuff and other things going on. So, but you had the date fixed in time quite a long time ago, and I knew that was my deadline. I needed to not only read but form some sort of viable opinion that I could express in that period of time. But I will have to say that you were quite generous with it. It wasn't like, let's do this next week, or you know, I didn't feel pressured like that at all.
Well, we both live on the opposite sides of the world. I mean, like, so I mean, like, it's like we're so much going on in each other's lives and everything. I'm a planner, as you probably could tell. So I love to plan.
It's fantastic.
And the thing is too, because not only do I want to give us time to read, but like to collaborate. And that's the thing too, is like, and that's the thing I love about doing something like this, is that because it might take a while for us to figure out what we want to read, right? Like that's the thing about not just to read it, but to figure out like what are we going to pick? Because what if you already picked it, but I've already had my heart set on this, and I'm like, well, give me a couple weeks. It's like I want to give myself enough time to be able to find something, because here's the thing, people. When I give Angshiman something to read, I want it to be like legit. I don't want to give him just some random, like, I read the 6-issue miniseries of Spider-Man versus Chasm, and it's like, I don't want to give him that, because I'm sure you are a gracious person you probably appreciate any comic book for the most part, right? But like, when I give you something to read, when it comes from me, Angshiman, I want you to be like, okay, Paul gets me.
Right.
I want to be
I think that was the idea. The idea was that, can we figure out a recommendation, not from the point of view of what I like, but what we know from each other and chatting with each other. Can we figure out something that's going to be sort of out of their wheelhouse, but also have the capacity to really connect? Now, that's not to say that they necessarily did. That's what we're going to find out today. You know, did these books actually connect, or are we going to end up disappointing each other by saying, oh, you like this crap? Oh my gosh, I can't believe it.
I'm like, I don't know. I might have to reconsider this whole thing. No.
Yeah, this entire friendship has now been called into question.
We're done. Daytripper, no good. No.
But we did think that, okay, I want to challenge that person, put them a little bit out of their comfort zone, but also it's got to be something that I personally like. So I picked a book that I personally enjoy, but I also did pick a book that I thought would have a good chance of being something you would enjoy, and I think vice versa as well.
Exactly.
You pick picked something that is one of your favorites, but you're not picking it simply because it's a favorite of yours, but you're picking it because you think the other person has got a very good chance of connecting with this.
Exactly. And so,
Right.
so moving on to you for you already kind of give a little bit about this, but yeah, for me or for you, what was Craven's Last Hunt like as you kind of like your familiarity with it, if I can even talk right?
Right. So here's the interesting thing is um, I had read Spider-Man versus Kraven on a couple of different occasions, but these are older stories,
The Steve Ditko
and they
stuff.
were yes, right. So I think, in fact, I must have read a reprint of Craven's first appearance or the first adventure in which Craven, fights. So I had an idea about Craven,
Mm-hmm.
and when I heard about Craven's Last Hunt, I think I was coming back into comics where I'd gotten away from comics after the age of 15 or 16. And then I didn't read any comics until I was 21 or 22. And then I came back into
We're the
reading
same.
comics.
We're
Yeah,
exactly the
the same
same.
Dark Ages. Yeah, that's what.
Crazy. That's so
Yeah,
crazy. Wow. Anyway, I'm sorry.
it works
Continue.
that way with Lego. I've heard is that you have it when you're a kid, and then you kind of go away, and then those are the Dark Ages, and then you come back out of the Dark Ages, etc. But I think at the time when I was coming back at 22 or 23, I wanted to read serious comics, and I wanted to read literature, and so I had discovered that comics could be literature, and I
Right.
discovered that they could be great, and I really embarked upon that in a big way. Although I had some superhero comics in there, I think Alan Moore's America's Best Comics series, for example, was very formative for me at that point, but also Ultimate Spider-Man, which
Mm.
I really enjoyed when it was
Yeah.
coming out. And so then I was like, well, I've got Ultimate Spider-Man and it's really working for me as a sort of reboot, etc. I
Mm.
don't want to read this cheesy Craven stuff, That was my idea. It's like when people said, oh, it's very it's a big famous story. I was like, well, how good can it be? So I will admit that I had that certain kind of adult condescension towards
Fair
it.
enough.
Like, I
Fair
was like,
enough.
maybe it
Yeah.
would have been a thing that I would have enjoyed when I was 14 or something. So even though I knew it had a great reputation, and I'm not going to name any names, but there are comics that have a great reputation that people told me to read. And when I read them, I didn't really enjoy them as much. So I think I had this sort of superior idea, but then I never said that because it's on so many lists and so many people
Sure.
say it's the
Yeah.
greatest or one of the greatest Spider-Man stories. So when you brought it up, I was just like, is this going to be my reckoning? Do I actually now have to finally, either I have to admit that I'm a charlatan, I'm a pretender of some sort of a Spider-Man fan who hasn't read one of the most famous Spider-Man stories, or I'm going to have to suck it up and finally read the story. So
Yeah.
I have to admit that I approached it with a little bit of trepidation, where I was just like, all
Wow.
right, this is the assignment, right? Let's see whether let's see how this goes.
Oh my God. Okay, we're gonna save this for last then because I am like this is
Well. I think in many ways you're saying. See, here's the thing: is that I don't think it's about good or bad. It's just
fair.
showing you how our tastes are
Right.
like. This is what I like, and this is what I
Yeah.
want to read,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah. Yeah.
thing is not for me. I think it's the one thing that we have in common, even though you might say it's because it's artsy and I might say, oh, because I want to be artsy or something like that. At the end of the day, there's not that big a difference between those
There
two
isn't.
attitudes. It's like,
There's
I
not.
like
There's
what I like and I don't want to read what I
yeah.
don't like.
And that it's funny because I being a musician back in the day, I play music still, but like being like in the independent music scene, there's a lot of that. Like, well, I'm like, mega artsy. I can't even listen to like band. I'd be openly listening to like the Counting Crows, and everyone would be like, like this stuff, like just silly stuff like that, and it sucks, and it's big in film, right? The film people, they're all about, like, oh, I couldn't watch superhero movies now. They're just beneath me. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's to me, it's like you gotta love what you love, but you gotta be honest about yourself too, right? Like not you, but like just you
No,
in
I do.
general. Yeah, well, yeah, but me too, right? I mean, like the thing
Yeah.
is, I have to recognize I don't tend to gravitate towards mega artsy avant-garde stuff. But at the same time, I appreciate it when it hits a lot, and I recognize that. And I think that that's the cool thing about your channel, that you've already shown me different stuff that I would never even thought about getting. And I'm like, oh, this is legit good. And, and that's the thing about, just branching out. You don't have to be a different person. It's about experiencing. And I think that's the thing about this whole thing we're doing here, is that it's helping me experience, because I guess I'll lead into the Daytripper first. I do think it's a good segue,
Sure.
because I think with me, I want to.
So how did you feel when I said Daytripper?
Sure.
Did you go, oh crap?
No,
Like, now I have to read Daytripper?
no, not at all. In fact, I would say I was looking forward to it, because again,
Right.
I need to force myself, and that's the thing about the binge that I love. I force myself to even read books that I want to read. It's like, because I'm so lazy about stuff, right? And because honestly, Angshuman, if it's up to me, after I'm done hanging out with my family, I'll just sit up, watch football stuff on American football stuff on YouTube all night, and then go to bed. Like, it's seriously, if I let myself do that, and it's just like one of those things where I just get in this routine. So I wanted to read the stuff, and Daytripper was a book that, again, I kept hearing about, and I want to branch out and do more things. So when you said Daytripper, I'm like, that's perfect. Here's what's crazy, and we're gonna do our best, and me included, to not spoil everything, because I want people to experience these books as much as possible. But I have to address the elephant in the room here about both these books that we read. I did not, and this is no BS, Angshuman, and you're gonna laugh about this. I had no idea what this book was about. So when I picked Kraven's Last Hunt, I had no idea that death would be the theme of both these books. I was like, oh.
Yeah. It worked out very nicely. Because this other thing, just before we launch into this, we did say that, we gave ourselves enough time to pick books or something like that. But I think, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, it was just our first picks. The first thing that you said, I was like, I haven't read it and I will. And the first thing that I mentioned, you said, I haven't read it and I will. So we didn't actually go through a number of choices. These were both our first picks, which makes the fact that they have these thematic similarities even more of a coincidence.
It's special. I think it's really cool. Like, I think that I'm a big believer in, like, fate. I have no scientific proof of fate, right, Angshuman? But I believe in fate. I believe in things happen for a reason, and I think that us meeting together to have this theme is important, because I just kind of getting into it. Daytripper. So I read the first issue. I was like, okay, like, it's I wasn't like glued to it. I was like, okay, I'm vibing it and just read it, okay. And I get to the end, and I was like, whoa, what? And it was really cool. And for those who haven't read Daytripper, I'm not going to explain exactly everything, because I want people to read it. It's a special book, and I was going to say right now, I'll just kind of give you my overall review. I loved it. I love this book. Like, I wasn't like, I didn't know what to expect. And I think that's maybe what was the best thing about it, Angshuman, was that because I didn't know anything about the book, like, I had no preconceived notions. I had no idea. All I knew is that I hear Daytripper, I think of the Beatles, and I think of, there's a band called Daytripper that I'd never heard before, but people talk about it. And then also the idea of day tripping, meaning like hallucinating, dreaming, etc. Right? I figured either going to be a big Beatles reference, or it's going to be about hallucinating, dreaming, whatever, right? And what I got was, I'll let you answer this question later, but just kind of put a pin in this. I don't know if Daytripper is supposed to be about, like, is it him imagining all these things happening? Like, I don't know how the Daytripper part happens. Maybe I'm too dumb to get that part, but we can talk about that in a second. But regardless, I had knowing no idea what's going to happen, and you get like this big cliffhanger, and I don't really know what's happening until I get to the next issue and went, oh, at the very end, I'm like, okay. And as I keep going, I'm like, oh, that's effing brilliant. About how he basically, again, without spoiling it, incorporating.
Well, I think you could spoil it a little bit. I mean, it's a discussion on these books. I mean, fair enough warning, but yes, there are 10 issues in Daytripper, and they're collected together in a trade paperback, and I'm guessing that you read it in a trade format, so...
More or less. I read it. So we have this thing in the States here, which I'm not sure if you guys have this over there. But
like comics?
web comics, but it's a library.
Right.
So I didn't have to pay for it, which is amazing.
Right.
And I wasn't, and by the way, not illegally, if you know what I'm talking
Right,
about.
no, I was wondering if it was like
Not you.
Comixology or Hoopla or something like that.
No. Yeah, like I was talking to the audience, because I always tell the audience, you know the site I'm talking about, which I had to use because I had to get pictures. But again, that's a whole different thing. But yeah, no, I read it via Hoopla. Do you have Hoopla over there? Is that something you guys have over there?
but I know of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Hoopla is amazing, bro. I freaking love it. It's incredible. Yeah, I read it through Hoopla. I love it. And I actually read it during work. I work at a call center, and so I like at the beginning of my day, I don't take a lot of calls. And so I just kind of started reading it, like, I read it in the morning a little bit before I got my daughter up, and then just kind of pieced it together. And excuse me, it just became like something that I just, basically, this guy, it's about a guy, just peripherally, just really quickly, guy kind of going through his life, and he writes obituaries for the newspaper. And how that incorporates with the end of every issue, just, it really messed me up, because the theme, which I think the important part to talk about, something, a spoiler, and the theme here is death, but also like living your life to the fullest, right? I mean, and that's like the obvious thing. But what's crazy about this Angshuman was like how much I related to this. And it was like a huge punch to the gut in times. Like there was something here where the second issue, like I like the first issue fine, but the second issue really messed me up. Like it like kind of made me go, man, it kind of not question. I found the panel here. I brought it out here for I thought I put it on the hold on. I thought I found, sorry guys. I thought I found the panel here. There was a specific panel I wanted to show. Is it this one? God dang it. I'll bring it up in a second. But anyway, there was a specific panel where he's talking to the girl he meets in this issue, and she kind of calls him out, like, "Are you living your life or whatever?" And I was like, "Damn!" Like, I even posted it in Instagram and stuff like that. I was like, "This is calling me out," and it basically, I was just like, I need to, like, it really called into question, like, me as a person, like, and as I kept reading every issue, and everything, it just made me connect more and more to like what I'm doing as a man now, to be honest, because the thing about this book that I loved was that you could relate to it in different aspects of your life in every single way. And, and that's special. And I think that that's the thing, slice of life books, I don't really tend to go to. And maybe it's because also I don't want to be depressed, because I don't want to be called out like I am. But I'm really, again, I believe in fate, Angshuman, that we were meant to meet. So like, and you're so gracious with your time, and we're doing this because I was meant to read this, because it really helped me like define what I'm doing as a man now, as a father, as a husband, and as what I want to do with my life, which is to create things, whether it be comic books or music or whatever, or shows about comic books and talk about them. It was really calling into that idea of like, don't become the mundane person. And that's like, that's all obvious. Those are all obvious things. We know that as people, but to see that in real life and played out by the creators here was pretty brilliant. And again, everything was so creatively done, how it tied into that ending. And because I'll just say this, okay? Again, I'm not trying to spoil it, because I think it's special. I do think it's special what happens at the end of these books. But I'll say this: the fact what happens at the end of these books, Angshuman, it reinforces the idea of stop wasting time. And that was, to me, what I got out of this, was don't waste time. I already knew that as when you become a father, that's the first thing that I realized, at least for me, and then people have told me that before, was that you realize how much time you wasted as a young person when you have a kid. And as soon as I held that baby in my arms for like 2 weeks, I was like, what the F was I doing for like 30 years? you know? And so anyway, the end of these issues was just, it felt like a call to me. And like, I'll get into more stuff and I'll let you talk here. I'm going on and on. I apologize. But it was more, oops, see, I revealed myself. Can't use that one. It just revealed to me, what what I have been missing in my life as far as like, or what I need to be keep doing in my life. So anyway, I love this book straight up. I loved it.
Wow, that's great. I mean, I think it's it's a book that's I don't know if it's slice of life. I mean, I get why it might be thought of as slice
Kind
of
of.
life.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
It's got this obviously it's got this realism to it, but it's also got this magical thing to it, which is not
Hmm.
necessarily magical, but it's got this speculative fiction, so the question of why is it called Daytripper, and the 10 chapters or the 10 issues that this series is made up of are 10 different days in some ways. Some of them might take place over a couple of different things, but the idea being that every
Oof.
day is a different day, and every day in your life could be your last day. So the
Yes.
idea of looking at a single life with alternative last days, I think, is the mechanical thing that makes Day Tripper, kind of stand out. That's the
Hmm.
gimmick in some way. But to me, I think it would have been just a gimmick if it hadn't followed through on that by saying a little bit more than just, any day could be a last sort of thing. It's that preciousness of life. But the preciousness of
Hmm.
life, I also think that, it doesn't have to be like you have to achieve great things, but like every day could be, it could be full of potential, but it could also be the end. So what has happened until then becomes the life. It could be at the age of 7, or it could be at the age of 70, or it could be at, so all of the chapter titles are actually the age that the character is on that day, which is, again, one of the one of the fantastic ways of weaving this in. So I'm really glad to know that you liked it, because I did think that, yes, since you're not a person who usually reads slice of life stories, maybe a slice of life story with a little bit of fantasy in it, a little bit of, you can consider it sci-fi, or you can consider it alternate, like, and that's one of the questions that people have. What do you think it is? Do you think it is, do you think it's alternate realities? Do you think it's alternate timelines? Do you think
Sure.
it's, changing of the past, or blah, blah, blah? And you could take that
Hmm.
whole mechanical sort of thing, but it's really about the feeling that it does. And then you've got the 10th chapter, which I think is the one that pulls it all together. And it would have just been a collection of short
Hmm.
stories if it wasn't for that final chapter. That final chapter says, well, it's not just a collection of short stories. It's more like a novel. And what is that, what is that difference, I think, is quite but I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed it as much.
Yeah, it's so crazy because, and I'm not just saying it because it was. I got the panel here. I'll throw up that really felt it called into question a little bit, but I did love the preciousness of everything, of how, um, yeah, this right here, you know, like just not traveling. The idea of like always, because to me, I'm a big believer in always projecting what I can get out of everything, whether even if it's not what exactly they're saying. Like when I hear something like this, I think of like, don't be stagnant. That's the thing I get out of that, right? Like that's the whole purpose. You can take deeper meaning out of every, oops, wrong one. Deeper meaning out of everything, but like for me, it's just it was, I love the idea of like you said, every day could be your last, and how you never know what's going to happen. And there was a couple times, there was a time here where when his dad, the issue where his dad died, um and he walks downstairs and he's like, I just see him everywhere. And it was another impactful moment where a friend of ours died right before COVID, about 4 years ago, tragically. And one of my best friends, I texted him that those panels. I said, I'm like, and he do, and all I did was just texted him that those two panels. If he says, he says, I see him everywhere, and he exactly, he just, that's all I wrote. I sent him, and we just connected just these two panels, sequential art, just invoking what we feel exactly, about our old friend, our brother. And just, I love that this book got so much emotion out of me that I was not expecting. Like, I really was not expecting that. And it really reminded me, and it just goes to show you how important it is to, like, again, that panel I showed it before about not being stagnant, traveling / pursuing the things that you love, and not just being stagnant to where you want to just go tunnel vision, just read Spider-Man comics all the time. But to read something like Daytripper, I mean, I'll be honest, I get more out of reading Daytripper, of like a book that invokes so much emotion out of me, than I do maybe as a reading like a Chasm miniseries. But the thing is, I may have more fun reading a Chasm series, but I may get more out of emotional satisfaction about the human condition. And I say that not to be like condescending, but like being real, like that makes you really like remind me and rethink that, like, hey, you know what? Don't waste time. Time is precious. So yeah, you nailed it on this one, man. This was a fantastic book.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. I mean, I think there are. This is also the kind of book, and I saw something in the comments, Gore Vidal, who's mentioned this before to me as well, that there is a way of returning to this book throughout your life. I think the way that it's written and the way that it's textured and the kind of glimpses that it has of different ages, I think it's also one of those books that can be different depending on when you read it and when you come back to it. So
yeah, absolutely.
I've read it maybe 4 times end to end, and I've read like the individual chapters a little bit more at random as well. And it is, it's obviously the same book, but there is a difference based on where you are and what you've gone through and what you're going through. And to me, that seems quite extraordinary, that these brothers wrote this story that speaks to so many different times of life and so many different stages of life, that not only different people and readers can get the kind of meaning out of it that that you're saying that you got, but the same person can get multiple meanings, and multiple return trips to it will yield different emotional results for the same person. I think is also another extraordinary thing in this book. And this is one of those things that when I think about what books deserve to be on my shelves, we always want the books that we know we'll go back for. And this also qualifies to me as one of those books that if you loved it, you can come back to it and see how it changes. And if you didn't like it, you can still come back to it, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, and see if that changes. The book being the same, but you being different, I think is one of those things that I find quite extraordinary about this book as well.
No, I think you're nailed it on the money, because the brilliant thing about, and I know his brother, that's great. The brilliant thing about this comic book is that there is so many different parts of your life that you can just go and you're going to get different perspective, after, you hit a certain age, or losing a loved one, as you get older, or when you're a kid. Like, there's so many different aspects of this book that you can read, and you're going to get a totally different perspective out of it. I mean, yeah, it is brilliant. And I'm curious, so this came out in 5 or 10 issues, you said, right? So do you own the single issues?
I do.
I was gonna say,
but I first read it in this trade paperback. So this is an old secondhand trade that belonged to someone called Alexander Evans, before it belonged to me.
Awesome.
So I bought this
love that stuff.
as a used copy. But when Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon, the brothers, the twin brothers who wrote and drew this book together, they visited New Delhi Comic Con in 2014, so 10 years ago. This is the only copy, like the deluxe or the absolute hadn't come out then. So this is the book I had. So they signed it. So I'm never getting rid of this old tattered paperback of mine. Yeah. So I went back and I found the 10 issues afterwards, but I think it works fantastically as a one volume read. I think the 10 issues, if I think about it, of them being published 1 month later, it would be that, like I would like, because I read it in one volume, I read the first chapter and I was like, I didn't expect the main character to die. I guess he wasn't the main character. And then I started reading the second chapter and I was like, oh, it's a flashback. So this is something, before he dies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a flashback. And then I get to the end of the second chapter and he dies at the end of the second chapter too, when he's 21. And I'm like, what's going on? So then and it's when I read the third chapter that it made sense. But if I try to put myself into the shoes of people who read the first chapter and then had to wait a month or maybe 2 months for issue number 2, I could see a lot of them just like not picking up the second issue or picking up the second issue and not really knowing what this is. So I think that reading it all together and reading it as a novel is really the way the story is. I mean, I don't want to say the only way to read it, but in many ways, it feels to me the way the story is meant to be read is to be read as one volume and not as 10 separate stories.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. See, I was going to ask that question about what do you think about, reading this in single issues. It's interesting that it's released as in the you could say the traditional American way with single issues. I guess we did that. I guess I don't know if you can say that. You know what I'm saying? But like, I'm with you. It works better as a trade paperback.
I mean, they're great chapters, and
for sure.
Great,
yeah.
And the fact that it's chapterized so tightly, like there's a beginning and an end to every single issue. It's taking place at a certain point of time. It's about a certain age. It's about a certain situation. In most cases, it's about one single day. It's about a 24-hour period or maybe a couple of days, in one or two of these cases. I think it works fantastically as 10 chapters. It just accumulates, I think, a little bit more as a trade. So so when I first read it as a trade, I kind of wanted to, I just wanted to have the singles because
I was going to say,
such a great,
the collector in you couldn't resist.
Yeah, the collector, but also I wanted to see, and I like different editions in which I try to compare the reading experience. So I kind of wanted to capture that experience of reading it one chapter at a time, and I really like it that I did that. But yeah, I believe that reading it all together as one book, even if you take, obviously you pause and you come back to it and things like that, but it's that whole thing put together and all of this story and seeing where they're going to go with it. And every single time, and this is the thing, is that it's 10 chapters. By the third chapter at the latest, you kind of understand the trick, or you understand the conceit, you understand the mechanism, but you still have another 7 chapters to go. So I would think that, now it would get kind of boring, or you'd be like, all right, I've seen the trick. Now I know exactly what's coming. And the thing is, you do know exactly what's coming. I mean, from the literal point of view, you know what's coming.
Yep.
Because that's been established. Yep. But they're still exciting chapters because then, and I think this is the point you were making, mechanically, it tells you that it's not about what's coming, because what's coming is inevitable and will come no matter what for everyone. What comes before that is what matters. What comes before that thing, that moment. And that's what I thought was the inversion of the story, is that first it's a gimmick, second you understand the gimmick and you go with it, and then you realize it's more than the gimmick, because it will come, and it will come for all of us, and it will come for this character over and over again in every chapter that you read. It will happen, and that's how the story will end. But a story is not about its ending. A story is about what happens before it. And that I thought was really, really beautifully done.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I couldn't say any better than that. Like that's, yeah, I love this. I need to get this. I'll probably look for again. I'm a bargain bitch, so I'm gonna look for a cheap version of the deluxe probably. But I think this is definitely something I need to pick up. I didn't even have my wife read this. I think she'd love it. I think it's brilliant. I mean, straight up, I was not expecting to love it as much as I was. I mean, not saying I didn't want to. I just wasn't expecting to really connect to it as much as I did. And again, as a good segue, I had no idea the themes of this would be would go into this one. So
Yeah, into the next one. What is the next one?
Yes. Woo. So all right. So yeah, I guess. Do you want me? Should I let you go, or how do you want to proceed with this one? You want me to explain my history with this, or
go ahead?
Okay. So Kraven's Last Hunt. I wanted to pick something that because I do think superhero comic books can be ridiculous and not like respected by people who is going to come up like people who who wouldn't read them would look down on them. Not because I don't read slice of life books, but I wouldn't look down on them necessarily. I just don't want it's not interested in them. I feel like it's easy to look down on these things as like silly stuff. And as a kid, that's all I was told. Well, these are for kids. I'm like, and then as we got older, we realized that they started drawing like, half naked women on them. And then they realized they're mainly for adult white men. But thankfully that's been changing. But regardless, but people always collected comics to like read, or to collect them to like sell. And that's still going on today, that's not my bag. I bought comics because I love the characters. And, and that's the thing about, I've always wanted to get people to read more comic books. That's why I have the hashtag read more comics. And whether it be Daytripper or, reading Sonic the Hedgehog, I don't care. The comic medium is brilliant. And I always thought that comics never got and still don't get the respect it deserves because it's a brilliant medium. And so I discovered your channel, I really wanted to get people to understand that there is legitimate Spider-Man that is, I think, complete art with a capital A. And I'll never forget I do a podcast called the MCU our MCU show with my friend Sean, and MCU fan show. Sorry, my head whole brain further. We got through different names, so I get them all mixed up. MCU fan show with my friend Sean, and we used to do a Patreon episode where we talk about like comic books, and of course that was my favorite thing to do. And we did it on this show, or the show on this comic book. And I remember telling him, I think I put this as good as Watchmen, in my opinion. Like, it's that good. He's like, no. I was like, nah, it is. Like, this is completely, like, I look at this book, it's got everything I need. It's got brilliant layouts, but it's not to where it's like over the top. It's beautifully paced. It's got humongous deep themes. It's got great comic characters in it. And it's got a tragic, crazy story. You're weaving multiple storylines together. I just think it's brilliant. I think it's one of the best superhero comics ever made. And if for whatever reason, people just, maybe because it's Spider-Man and it's not like Frank Miller writing it, that's why people don't respect it. But that's what I wanted people to do. I've been saying for years now, for a long time, Kraven's Last Hunt is the GOAT. And to me, it is probably my favorite Spider-Man story ever. Like, looking at it right now. And it's funny because I didn't even read this until probably like you talked about, Angshiman, like our eventual return from the Dark Ages, we rediscover ourselves in our early to mid 20s is, I went back and read it in a trade, and I just fell in love with it. I always heard about it and knew what happened. I went back, I bought all the single issues. So this is my favorite Spider-Man cover, maybe of all time. I have this poster as well, but I have the single issue, right, and it's beautiful. I got the poster like a month ago. I need to hang it up somewhere. But basically, I fell in love with this book. I love it. I have all the single issues. And I just think that it is something that when people who love comics and maybe don't love superhero comics, not saying, how I would say this is that it's definitely it's a mandatory Spider-Man comic to read. If you love comic books, I think, to me, this is a quintessential comic book to read for many different reasons. But I'll get into those as we get into this more. But when we talked about this, I thought about, I got to give Angshiman a comic book that is like legit, like a superhero comic that I think is good that he hasn't read. Which, to be honest, you've read all the good ones. So it's going to be hard for me to find like the cream of the crop here, because you've already read The Watchmen. I'm assuming you've read a portion of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing and yada yada yada. but I wanted to find something that maybe you haven't read or weren't expecting, which you've revealed that it was all the things I realized, and I didn't.
I mean, I was floored by how you honed in on, and I was just like, how did he know, So as I was saying right at the beginning of the live stream, yes, a very good pick from that front, absolutely.
Excellent. All right. So anyway, enough. Stop for me. I'm gonna throw it to you. You have the floor now. You can go. Please tell me.
All right. So as I was saying earlier, I was a little nervous. So I'm going to be honest, because I was just like, oh man, if I don't like it, then he's going to be like, what the hell, man? This is the greatest thing ever. And you snot nosed. But you know that I do enjoy superhero stories, and I do enjoy, I enjoy the vehicle, obviously. I think my issues, so to speak, with superhero stories have been greatly exaggerated. But I think also, when you were talking about my channel, is when I found YouTube comics and people talking about comics on YouTube, I found a lot of them talking about Marvel and DC. So it wasn't like my thing wasn't like I reject that.
Sure,
It's like, people are doing this, and they've got LCSs, and they've got like pull lists. I mean, like, I'm not going to be able to, speak on that level, but there are these other comics that maybe could use the same kind of thing. So it was definitely not about, and yes, I've of course enjoyed a number of, not just artsy, I don't want to be the guy who's like, well, I enjoy Doom Patrol by Grant Morrison, but nothing else, that's not really the way. So one of the things is that I think, and people are like, when I started reading this book, I was a little nervous. I was like, what if I don't like it, and then I had this idea also, I think, when I started it, is that, it's going to be one that's really overwritten, because and there are different ways of overwriting, and I've seen this a lot, not only in superhero comics. I've seen a lot of overwriting, but there's a particular kind of overwriting that I think I enjoy, which is why I like Alan Moore and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing or V for Vendetta. It's like there's almost a purpose in which the words are going to sort of, achieve this thing. And then there's a certain other kind of overwriting where I feel people aren't trusting the art or the layouts enough, and they feel the need to cram things in there because you need to have action. And I think, don't get mad at me, but I think like someone like Chris Claremont isn't someone that I've enjoyed a lot.
Interesting.
And yeah, but to me, Frank Miller is one of those people who's kind of like half and half.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's a certain kind of Frank Miller writing that does that works for me, and it depends on the art that it's being married to. And then there's a certain kind of Frank Miller writing that is just overboiled, and it's a little too boiled. So even in hard boiled kind of thing. So when I was reading this, I was like, I think this is going to be closer to Frank Miller than just a random, like it's got some intention, etc. And then I was like, I'm enjoying this writing, but I will say that it took me till like the second issue that I was just like, I'm now getting into the vibe of this book, what the rhythm of this book is. And I don't think that's about the book. I think that's about me, because I had all these expectations or these biases or these prejudices. Like, most of the first issue was me kind of wrestling with that and saying, where does this fit into the biases that I had? And it was from the second issue onwards that I was like, no, I'm going to take it for its own thing. And a couple of things really stood out to me is that it definitely felt to me like something that belongs in that Dark Knight Returns. I mean, you mentioned Watchmen. I don't know when this came out, but this would be like, what, 86, 87, 88, somewhere in those areas?
Yeah, somewhere right in that area. Yeah.
Because it feels like that. Now, I don't know if it was responding directly to the fact that Watchmen and The Dark Knight and Daredevil before that had been written, and it was some sort of a response to that, or if it was, but it feels more in that club, which is a good thing, because it's got that, it's dark and gritty, but not just for the sake of being dark and gritty, not just for being exploitative, and that I really started appreciating. And then when it became more abstract, I guess, for lack of a better word. I was just like,
Yep.
this is trying to be, very interior. So it's got all these narration. And so in comic books and, any kind of comic books, one of the questions that always occurs to me, and it's not a deal breaker, it's just a question that occurs to me is, who is the narration for? So sometimes it's built into it, like, oh, this is a confession, or it's a letter, or it's a recording, or someone's being interrogated by the police, or it's a diary entry, or otherwise it's just narration, the way that a novel might have narration. And so that's always interesting to me to say, and so when I was like looking at this, I was like, who is this being narrated to? Is this being narrated to the reader, or are we plugging directly into the consciousness of Kraven and Spider-Man? And in fact, what I really liked also was that Spider-Man, when you plugged into him, had two different narrations. One was Spider-Man and one was Peter Parker. And then you had like the third, you had the Kraven narration. And I was like, oh, this is going to be all about the narration. It's not going to be about dialogue and the kind of traditional scene play as much. And that's something that the more it went on, the more I started feeling like, yeah, this is a comic that is reveling in being a comic. It's reveling in being, like, what kind of storytelling can I do with the comics medium? Like, whether it wants to be a hard-boiled Frank Miller type of thing or not, it's like, it's just got to do it well. And I thought it did it fascinatingly because, and I think what was interesting is I'm reading it in 2024.
Sure.
And I could see, and even though I don't read that many superhero comics, and I could see a lot of stuff that has come after it that, whether directly or indirectly, owes stuff to it. So one of the things that really stood out to me was like, this is like whenever, but when J. Michael Straczynski was doing Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, and he brought Morlun in, and Morlun had this whole totemic sort of representation.
I love that, by the
blew
way.
Peter's mind. Yeah. That was a great, like that was one of those runs where I was just like, oh, look, this superhero comic is making me feel excited.
All right.
And I really gave it a lot of credit for like how much it, got me back into superhero comics alongside. But when I was reading this, I was like, hold on, did J. Michael Straczynski just take a whole bunch of stuff from this? Because all of this stuff seems really familiar, including Peter being a little desperate and wanting to hide, and then, him wanting to just crawl away right at the beginning, this kind of oppressiveness that he's feeling. It's long before anything happens. There's this kind of, it's soaked in doom and gloom before they even come into contact with each other. And there's this sort of portentous feeling to it. And I remember that Morlun thing also having those kind of, and in many ways, including this feeding on spiders and taking the energy and preparing for this last battle, etc. Right at the beginning, I was like, I can see at least 2 or 3 different comic storylines or things that have come later that seem to be riffing directly on what's over here. So even after all of these years, this kind of feels modern because so many things that have come after it have sort of kept it alive or kept referencing it or kept doing the thing, which I thought was fantastic. So it's kind of like, it seems to me like a very quintessential formative type of Spider-Man. I think, one of the things I've talked about on my channel is Roger Stern's Spider-Man, for me, was a very quintessential Spider-Man.
Fantastic.
And this feels like for, maybe a generation after that or something, being that sort of thing of taking Spider-Man, of this established hero who we know is not going to die and who we know is not going, even if he does, he'll reboot and all that stuff that we know with comic books. But saying, when you have that, how can I still make it matter? How can I still make it serious? How can I still make it, because we all kind of know that nothing huge can actually happen. So to actually have huge things happen within that framework, like, okay, he's not dead, he's drugged, he pulls himself back out of the grave, but you're like, yeah, but it's not about the plot of it, it's about what that plot allows you to explore thematically. That's what I thought was really surprising. And I was like, hey, this comic has a lot more meat on its bones rather than just being, here's a puppet show of things that we've seen a
Right.
hundred
A
times
dark.
before.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
mood of it, the gloom of it, the how drenched it was in that, including those kind of long theatrical soliloquies. I mean, this probably has more text than many indie or slice of life comics do. There's a lot of talking, there's a lot of narration. I mean, there's not that much dialogue, but even though, even where it is, but it doesn't sacrifice on the mood and the atmosphere. It doesn't sacrifice on the action. But it has very interesting. It has a very interesting way of doing it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you enjoyed it then.
Yeah, I absolutely did. And I enjoyed it in very surprising ways, So one other
Mm-hmm.
thing that I thought about is like, if I enjoy it, I'll enjoy it as a sort of good old fashioned throwback
Sure.
to,
Yeah.
good guy punching out the bad guy, or the bad guy almost having the good guy, and then the good guy coming back with a sort of comeback sort of thing. This whole idea of him, Kraven, being the manipulator, and Kraven being sort of in charge and succeeding and getting what he wants, and then releasing Spider-Man out there, or he's kind of in charge of it all the way through, was a surprising and refreshing thing. Like, it felt a lot more, as I was saying, it felt a lot more modern. And I thought, like when we were talking about Untold Tales of Spider-Man by Kurt
Yeah.
Busiek, which is, it's like, but that's got a certain tone, it's got a certain gee whiz sort of tone. It wants to plug into those Peter Parker years, but it also is playing into that type of storytelling. This was not that kind of thing at all. This was a much more, dark, but it was also a very different kind of storytelling. It was exploring different things than I'd seen. And it kept it at, so you've got Spider-Man who disappears pretty much for issue 2 and 3,
Yeah, he's gone.
and then comes back at the sort of midpoint of issue 4, and then you've got the issue 5 conflict, and then you have no Kraven for issue 6. So it had like a weird like for Kraven versus Spider-Man, there's only like really 2 times when it's Kraven versus Spider-Man. It's sort of Spider-Man with like in the grave, or come back out of the grave, and then
Sure.
I wasn't expecting that, and
Yeah.
the amount of time that was given to the fact that Pete and MJ are newlyweds, and she's waiting at home for him. Like, all of that stuff is like, it wasn't what I was expecting at all, and it added to this sort of gravity and to this feeling of sadness. Like, that's one of those things. It's like, it's 6 issues, and they're kind of bleak issues. I mean, they're not
definitely
as
bleak.
as nihilistic as, say, Watchmen or something like that, but it's definitely dark, much darker than I thought, but it's also quite heartfelt.
Mm-hmm.
I will ask you one thing though,
Please,
and
please.
I don't know if this is because I don't know about the reception. I know the critical reception and the popular view of this is that of a masterpiece. What about Craven's suicide at the end? Like, how is that for you? How do you interpret that? Because I did have some questions about it. I was just, like, is it like how does that work with how we look at depression or self-harm, or is it just a plot thing, or is it, oh, I'm done with what I needed to do and now I can go? Like, how does that work for you as far as like the way it's used in the storytelling over here?
Well, that's a great question. So the suicide is something that was very, it was very important for, I think, for J.M. DeMatteis, who's just a fantastic writer, by the way. I'm not sure how much you've read of his stuff, but he is just a solid writer, and also a great human being, like just a gracious dude, awesome guy. So it's, when you have both those things combined, it's like, thank you, because that doesn't always happen for people who the line of "don't meet your heroes" is accurate. So when it is not accurate, you're like, oh, thank goodness. But I think with the suicide was always a part, because this was supposed to be a Batman story. originally. Like this was, and that's what's so brilliant about, I think, the idea of this whole, the whole story is because it was never intended to be Spider-Man. It was just the concept of an idea of like a hero having to literally will themselves out of death, of, you know, find themselves again. And then also like coming to like that conclusion of like this villain, like finding the fulfillment through only one thing. Right. And just that whole dark concept of like death and how that's valuable and things like that. And I don't know, like, because that all turned into, you know, that whole concept was the basis of like how, you know, he had to find a character that no one cared about. And so when he put out, when he pitched this idea for Spider-Man, he asked, could he have Kraven? Because at this time, Kraven had been only in the comic for like once in the last like 6-7 years, or if that. And so they're like, yeah, we don't care. So it was kind of a big deal. Like, you know, this classic villain got offed and people are like, oh, but people weren't like bummed out that like he was dead. They were more shocked that oh my God, it added the gravitas to that story of just like, again, the value of life. And I think what's really brilliant about this whole story, and how people perceived it was, because you brought up a couple good points of like, you know, you don't expect Spider-Man to be, you know, kind of like not as confident as he is, right? And I think that's the awesome thing about it is that when he's trying to hallucinate his way back to reality. I think it's brilliant because we get into the idea of Peter that he's not always the most confident person. And I think that goes back to the relatability of the character, that even though he's Spider-Man, he can like do all these amazing things. He still is that human. The human element of Spider-Man is like sometimes overdone to a point of like, he's such a loser, blah, 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 blah. But I don't think that's necessarily what people care about. To me, I've always connected to Spider-Man because he's an everyday person. And he's not just an everyday person. He's got real issues, and not just like, he can't pay his rent. Like that's overblown. He's a real person because he has legitimate fears. He has legitimate, like, you know, the brilliant thing about this comic, in my opinion, was the you know, people talk about, we can't write when he's married. He's an adult now. I think you would agree here. The marriage only amplifies everything because he's got a wife at home who's like, where's my husband? And he's like, I got to get back to MJ. I got to get back to MJ. And there is no matter if you're married or have a significant other or whatever, you can relate to that. Because if you're trapped and you have to get back to your loved one, like, you know, they're worried about you and you can't communicate to them, like there's a panic there. And I think that like J.M. DeMatteis like nails that, right? And what's so crazy is, this story is part of an Epic collection, and I'm sure you're familiar a little bit with the Epic collection. They're supposed to be in like the of like not real time, but the continuity. I can't think of the word. You know, in order, right? Like, so basically, you're supposed to read them in chronological order. Couldn't think of the word.
Right.
So when you buy the Epic of Kraven's Last Hunt, which I just reread it recently with the whole thing for a friend's book club that we do, it was crazy because the wedding issue is like literally just a few issues before this. So you have like this big, bright great Paul Ryan art that's like super like throwback 60s, you know, and like they're getting married. John Romita has a beautiful cover of like just really bright, and you have, you know, basically, I'm going to throw this up here because I think this is brilliant storytelling. You have like MJ like beating the crap out of like a rat, you know, like, you know, just like she's just mad because she can't find Peter. It's like, this is pretty drastic, but I think that's what makes it great was because Jamie, I think he was married at this point. I'm pretty sure he was. He gets it. Like when you're married and you love, you know, your soulmate there, you're married to them. There is a commitment here, or married or whatever, but you get what I'm saying. And I think that it's to say that you can't write a Spider-Man that's married is just, it's hilarious to me when I read this, because this is like, it only makes it better. So yeah, I think people just, when they read this, they just were kind of like, oh, like wow. And I think they weren't because it wasn't like a prestige format. Like, and when I say prestige format, it wasn't a miniseries. It wasn't something they could promote. Like DC was brilliant because they promoted Watchmen and they promoted Dark Knight Returns, and it was a deal, right? Like it was a big deal when these books came out. This was a multi-part crossover over multiple Spider-Man comic books. And it was not it was promoted, but it wasn't like its own thing. So I feel like it almost did a disservice to it. So when people read it on Shimon, I think they were like,
Yeah.
whoa, but what happened? So anyway, I talked for a long time. Go ahead.
No, but I also like that about it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of things like the Elseworld stuff and the
Yeah, me too.
non-continuity things, because for someone who doesn't read them continuously year after year, they're fantastic to jump into and you get the whole story. But I didn't have any problems with the continuity of figuring out the continuity when I was reading this. Like the fact that they've gotten married and she's just moved in, they haven't yet unpacked. It's all just evident in that one scene, like the one that you
Yeah.
showed over there. And this idea of what he's panicking, Peter, what he's panicking about and what he's scared about, etc., is also quite clear. So I like the fact that it's within continuity and it's this kind of a story, and the one that has this beginning, middle, and end. It's got these strong thematic things in it. Now, I will say that I'm not always 100% sold on the mechanics of things, but that is, I think, where it comes in. It's just like you are playing with Spider-Man, so you're going to have certain limitations. You're playing with
Yeah.
this universe, with this thing, like as you said, you might be having crossovers across a couple of titles, but I think also I got the trade over here, and the introduction by J.M. DeMatteis is very interesting, and he talks about like how it was
Mm-hmm.
even with Batman before. It was like a Hugo Strange story and then a Joker story, and
Yeah.
then like he had 3 or 4 different ways, and it was all this like his thing is that fixating on that crawling back out of the grave part of
Yeah.
it, like the sort of come back into the thing, come back into life, of being dead and then coming back in. That resurrection thing is, I can see that's what the story kind of goes around, which is why I was intrigued by how Kraven decides to end his story,
Mm-hmm.
because like that was the part where I was just like, huh, like, I mean, what is
Yeah.
like what is that? Or and I don't know if I'm doing a very good job expressing
No, I
it, but
get it. Yeah.
that was a question that came up in my mind, because I understand Peter, and I understand how Kraven needs to win, and I know how Peter needs to survive, and he needs to live and get back. But he's like, oh, I shot him with a tranquilizer dart, and he's not really dead, and he's been even this idea of like, how could he possibly have survived for so long under
I
being
know.
buried
Right.
alive. But they set it up like way back at the beginning, where you've got that classic thing of where he goes, my regenerative powers. He mentions the thing that he's not 100%, and that's also one of the reasons why he gets taken down. This is what I like about it. Like, these are things I've seen all my life in superhero comics, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Superman's going to be, he's got that little bit of radioactive poisoning from the previous issue, which is why this guy can take him down. Or
Yeah.
she used magic and split him into 2 Supermans, and so now there's half a Superman in each dimension, and that's why this villain can take him down. Like, if you've got a really powerful hero, you need to give them a handicap. You need to hamper them somehow for them to be this thing. But you've got over here the larger thing is he's dealing with these questions of mortality. He's talking about Ned Leeds, and then he goes to Joe Face's funeral, as you were
Dude.
showing,
Yeah.
over there. So like,
Oh.
these are things that are on top of his mind over there. Although I did wonder, why does he web the door when they're trying to run out? Let them run out. He'll pay his respects and leave. What, he's got to show off in front of them? Like,
Well,
he look at me.
well, I think
I'm
well, in the,
joking.
no, but like I think here that's a good segue to this. 'Cause I love this page, absolutely love it, because you get into like my friend Adam, who's on the show a bunch. He put a good comment here because you were talking about how the dialogue, like the narration was interesting. You're kind of talking about all that, and there wasn't a lot of dialogue. And he said that JMD Mateus puts the book part of comic book in a good way. And that's brilliantly said by him, because this is a great example of Spider-Man talking to him, in the narration here, but then he like also is like the dialogue is so it's not a lot of dialogue, it's a little bit, but this right here, the 3 panels where he like turns around and he's like pulls money out of his costume and throws it down for a decent burial. You couldn't explain Spider-Man better in 3 panels than right there, because that's Peter. Peter is a good person. He's not just a superhero. Like, I'm a blah, blah, blah. Like if you knew that this guy was poor, like, and him doing that, like, that is quintessential Peter Parker right there. Chef's kiss. Love it. And it's, again, I just love the fact that he's staring at them the whole time. And he's like, hey, pulls out money. I just love it. It's so brilliant. And again, and this is why you talk about the comic medium, it being a perfect comic medium thing, where you have all this, right, about death. And what do you have at the very bottom? Kraven's henchman at the bottom of the panel or page, with that one panel, it's isolated, not a part of the main story of that right there on that page, is foreshadowing what's going. It's brilliant. And this comic is littered with stuff like that, using the comic medium to its advantage. Also using the book part, which Adam talked about, to its advantage. And you talked about it really using the medium to its full potential. And that's what this book does better than people give it credit for. It drives me nuts, because people just don't, like, they look at this stuff. I'm like this page right here, Angshima, I think this is effing brilliant. He's crawling in the sewer, like, to fight vermin. And look at this. Like, that is brilliant. It's a brilliant layout. Like, I think that's brilliant. I mean, it's not like mind blowing, but it's so creative, and you're getting all the things you need to do. I just love it. And the other thing I want to talk about, and you talked, I was wondering if you're going to bring this up, but you talked about you worried about being too much, like, too wordy, right? Because sometimes they over explain things, like the exposition, you could say, right? Like, which is a giant problem in comics, mainstream comics in general, whether it be superhero or whatever. Like, in fact, I would go on record saying, stop doing self narrations, like, of them and talking in their heads. Like, it's done literally to death, and it drives me nuts. I know it's a necessary evil, but get creative, because I'm tired of it. It's so bad. But the thing,
I like it when people like try different things from that narration, because as I was saying, like, I always have that question, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I have that question and I'm going to ignore it, but I'm still going to consciously ignore a question I had, and I know that it's part of the thing. But I agree with you. I think there are certain things in certain ticks, like that when I first read them, obviously they were mind blowing and they were brilliant. So it's like, it all depends on which one you read first, because by the time you've read 100 of them, the 101st one is not going to have the same effect.
Exactly.
Now, someone could say this one's better than the other 100 you've read. And you're like, yeah, it might be, but it's still the 101st. And that is not that comic's fault, That
Right.
comic could be the one that invented it, could have done it for the first
right,
time.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
if
it's like,
you're
well, screw
reading
this.
it after you've read 100 or 1,000 of the other ones, you're not going to be able to feel that in that way, which is another reason why I thought this one was so great, is because I could see things that came after it, again, just from my thing, but I could still feel what this was. But there is something about the way I think the writer of this trusts the artist, to me feels like pure comics, like, where it's not like, I'm going to do my writing and you do your art and somehow they'll come together. And that's one of those things that I've not ever appreciated as much, which happens more often. But in this one, I really felt like the writer and the artist knew, like, what they were bringing to the table, and the writer was giving the artist, like, the layouts you showed of when he's going into the sewers to look for vermin, and then it's flashing back to when he was in the coffin. And that's a thing that you didn't see before, right? Because you only saw him break out. This was written by the writer for the artist to draw in this way. Like, the writer said what the second panel is going to be and what the fifth panel is going to be. So I thought this was a much more stylistic and a much more comics infused kind of story than some of the other ones that I'm complaining about, the ones where I feel they're overwritten. What I mean is that it's not connected to the art and the layouts in the way like the artist is cooking over here because of the writer.
Well, and a couple things with that, because you are nailing everything. This is how well you know comics, Angshiman, because you touched on something. You said how connected they are. First of all, Mike Zeck and J.M. DeMatteis worked together already before. We're already they had a good working relationship because they did the Captain America series that actually introduced our distinguished Vermin here. So they already had a very connected relationship. And Mike Zeck is fantastic artist. He if you didn't know, drew Secret Wars, the famous 80s comic, where he drew most of it. He was late, and then Bob Layton took over.
Did he then create the black costume?
That was Ron Friend's. That's kind of Rick Leonardi. He was the first, I think, to draw it, maybe, but wasn't the first to. He didn't come up with it, I think.
All right. Because that happened in Secret Wars, right? I
remember,
he went to Secret Wars and he came back with a black costume.
Yeah. So, but yeah, they had a great working relationship. And the one thing, because I do want to write comics one day, and one of the things that he talked about a lot about
one day. What's this one day nonsense?
Well,
right?
I'm right. I'm writing.
Today.
I'm writing. The problem is finding an artist and finding the funding. That's the problem. I have scripts written. I have to find the artist and the money, All right. That's the hard part.
The tough part's already done.
Yeah, exactly. No, but the brilliant thing is he's always said when you write comics is you write the script, right? You let the artist have a lot of freedom, but he's like, but whenever I get the art back, I always rewrite. Because I have to fit, because not in a bad way, but I need to, because I get ideas of, I gotta change this now. And he also says, well, then I'll just take out dialogue because I don't need it because the artist does it. And this is a great example. And if you read, I've read a lot of J.M. DeMatteis stuff, and I think he's brilliant. In fact, we may have to do like I haven't read it, and I'm sure you have. Moonshadow. Have you read that one? Have you heard of that one?
Nope.
Okay.
I saw it mentioned in the comments right now, I think, by Gore Vidal, but I have not read it.
Yeah.
Who wrote the Justice League International?
J.M. DeMatteis.
All right. Okay.
And Keith Giffen. Yeah. So he is a brilliant writer, and he's just underappreciated. Just no one gives him the respect he deserves, because when he writes, he's like, he'll go, I don't need to write dialogue here. And you can see here, there's tons of pages that you'll see. Yeah. There's not, and that's a good example, but there you've got this part right here, which I think this part is brilliant. This, again, that whole idea of Mary Jane, she kills something, she has regret. There's there's this anger, and then there's oh my God, what did I do? And you have the grave thing continuing. Again, chef's kiss, brilliant. Again, not a lot of dialogue here other than the very, very top. And after that, not a lot. And then you've got things like this. This is another great example. This is to me one word, and this to me is a brilliant page. So I don't know. He knows when to lay off the dialogue and the captions. And that is something that comic writers, it's hard for them not to fill up space with words, to be real. But J.M. DeMatteis, as I think he evidently shows, he knows when to back off, because he wants his, as Adam said, aka I call him Pizza Time, my boy. He lets his artist cook. And again, another great example, one dialogue box, and he lets his artist do all the talking. It's not just you know what? It could be as easy as here's what needs to happen, have fun. And Zach goes, okay, and puts out a brilliant piece like this. This is brilliant. And this is what the comic medium, people don't understand how great storytelling and cinematic. People think movies are great, and they are movies. I love movies, but you know what? There is a lot of comics out there that are as cinematic as movies, if not more cinematic, in my opinion. So, I love this. This is a masterpiece. It should be, everyone should read it. It's incredible. I'm glad you enjoyed it, because I thought you'd like it. Yeah.
Also, this depiction of vermin seems very influenced by Tolkien's Gollum before the movies.
That's
I mean,
pretty brilliant.
obviously now that it's been made famous by the movies, etc. But the language and the sort of third person reference to itself and the protectiveness of within the caverns, etc. I mean, like I thought you could tell that the writer. I
Dude.
mean, obviously you've got the William Blake references, etc. Because
Sure.
I mean, you've got fearful symmetry in which is I think the original, because that's again from the introduction of this trade. This is where he talks about having worked with Zek before, as well as all that.
Yeah.
But fearful symmetry was what he called it, because it doesn't say Craven's Last Hunt anywhere until the trade paperbacks later, and even the first collection said Fearful Symmetry and Craven's Last Hunt, and then it became. But Fearful Symmetry is the reference that he keeps, to Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, the William Blake poem, which is made Spider, Spider in this thing. So you can tell he's a literary fellow.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
He's got Shakespeare references. He's got William Blake references. He's got J.R. Tolkien references, among others, I'm sure.
Right. Dude, the golem thing is that's pretty inspired, man. I never would have connected the two. But now
maybe I'm wrong. I was just like, again.
No.
Like,
I think you're on the money.
First impressions.
No, you're on the. I think it's inspired because I'm like, damn.
But Gollum from the books, man, not from the movies, because
Well,
the movies didn't exist yet.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
right. No, because listen, and as someone who I'm not a prose person unless I'm reading I'm listening to an audiobook. I'm a visual person. That's why I love comics. I have read The Hobbit. I do love The Hobbit. I love it more than Lord of the Rings. It's always been my favorite story. I love Lord of the Rings movies, but the books are harder for me to get into. I'm not as into
me too.
prose, but the Hobbit is brilliant. And yeah, Gollum, this definitely is. I see the influence there. Really quick before we wrap up, I do want to mention he does do a sequel to this, and there's different sequels.
Oh no, really?
Say. Well, the quasi sequels. There's like a follow up called. Well, no. Hold on. There's a
Why?
There's one that's like kind of like a one shot, kind of like a throwback, like the spirit of Kraven's kind of like haunting him. Not like literally, but like the idea of like Kraven's like what he's done and what he's gone through kind of idea. And that you have to read it. It's not like it's not a complete sequel, but
okay,
there is a sequel for Vermin. But so it continues his story, and we've actually covered it on our show, the Spider-Man Council, called The Child Within, and it's got Harry Osborn as a Green Goblin as the other villain, kind of almost like the Kraven character. So it's kind of like, I would say it's like a what's the word I'm looking? Not a sequel, but I can't think
spin-off.
of it. A spin-off, but not a
re-envisioning.
Yeah, it's re-envisioned. Like it's like an homage sequel almost, if you will. But anyway, that is another story.
A photocopy.
Yeah, not quite. I wouldn't say photocopy. It's not a photocopy. It's
no,
more.
I'm joking.
Yeah, but the I would say continuation, Adam. I think it's a pretty good.
All right, so then it's like a sequel.
Yeah. But the thing is, it's not the same kind of thing because it really tells the origin of Vermin completely, and where his psychological problems stemmed before Baron Zemo got to him. And it's dark, man. It's dark AF. And when you compile that with Harry Osborn and the father issues, and because he's Green Goblin, so Spider-Man's dealing with Green Goblin and Harry and Vermin and these dark concepts and ideas of fathers, and he talks about like his parents and all that stuff. It is more J.M.D. Mateus, chef's kiss. It's brilliant. And Sal Buscema, who is like John Buscema's brother, who is a legend, right? And Sal Buscema is like literally the little brother that no one really like, oh yeah, Sal Buscema, blah. Brilliant layouts, man. Brilliant layouts. Just using the meat. Like we're talking like 9-panel grids, like not like because he's a Watchmen like lover. We're talking 9-panel grids because that's what he grew up on, and he knows how to frame a whole page story of like 9 panels. And you're talking like there's an opening page on Shimon of like Vermin trapped by a doctor, like trying to help him. And it's a 9-panel grid of like a camera angle, like camera where it's like all like staticky or whatever, of Vermin going in and out of the camera and them trying to talk to Vermin. And it's just brilliant. And I'm just like, God damn, Jamie DeMatteis is just so good. So anyway, if you ever want to read those issues, track them down, like it is 1000% worth reading. I think you'd enjoy that too. So anyway, go, read all these books. These books are good, right? So yeah, let's, any final thoughts as we wrap up here?
Oh, I mean, thank you for having me on again, but also thank you for recommending this book, which I don't know if I would have read. Maybe I would have continued for some years, just go, I'll get to it one day, etc. If it hadn't been for this game. So, I thought this went really well.
Absolutely.
And I'm interested in doing this thing again. I think people should
we're gonna do it again.
Do this kind of stuff. Like, but with others, like we should pick things out of our comfort zone or our familiarity based on other things, and just try them. I do think that you got very lucky here, and I loved it, and I had a good time because I would have been honest, and I would have said, all right, what, I don't know. But I thought, I do have difficulty with a lot of these comics getting into them when they have a particular approach. Whatever it is, it didn't apply in this case, and I thought it was really good. I still think that these 6 issues, I can read them again, and just like we were talking about Daytripper, I might get something different out of it. I do think there is a density in it. I do think the fact that it is Spider-Man and it has to be within the world of Spider-Man and within these things of Spider-Man, give it some constraints, but I think with those constraints, like some good writers and artists, they can kind of do playful things, and I think this is good, and I think this is the kind of stuff that I would have expected in Batman and Daredevil and Punisher, things like that. I could get that, and to do it with Spider-Man, and to do it really focused on Kraven and not on Spider-Man himself, although of course Spider-Man plays a big role in that, I think was very good. I think I'll be interested in seeing, if we play this game again, what follow-up suggestions you can have, because I don't think everything's going to be as great, right? So it's going to be more challenging.
I've already got a couple in mind, actually. So don't worry. And that's the thing, because I won't reveal the comic that you told me that someone, I think you alluded to it, I think earlier. But you told me the comic that you're like, people told me to read this, and it makes me nervous because everyone told me how great it was, and I read it. I'm like, I don't really like it. I'm like, and I told you, Angshiman, I'm like, Angshiman, I can tell you right now, I would have never recommended that. I full on would never recommend that book for you, because I agree with you. I was like, because I just know what you're looking for. Because when you read it, this,
what is this? This is Court of Owls. Are you talking about Court of Owls?
Yes. I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to call anyone.
I'll say it.
Yeah. So. Because I don't like it as much as it's been a while since I've read it, but like I have people who love it, and I know like there's cool parts about it.
No,
I think
look,
it's overrated.
What people love again, and as we were saying right at the beginning, it's not about shaming somebody for something they haven't read or something they don't enjoy. I was thinking that we might have a much more interesting exchange in which you're trying to say it's great and I'm trying to tell you why it's not great, and instead it ended up both of us going, yeah, it's pretty great, so I think I'm interested in all kinds of conversation. I'm glad this one went this way, but I'll be intrigued to see.
Absolutely.
And I do think that this is the kind of thing that we should do more often with everybody, like whether they're YouTubers or Instagrammers or whatever. It's just like, like two people pick something the other one hasn't read, something out of their wheelhouse or comfort zone or whatever we want to say, and do this kind of exchange program. So I think as an idea, I look forward to seeing where we can go with it.
No, for sure. And I think and that's the thing too, is it's so funny you said that you love the conversation of not just everyone agreeing, but like the disagreements. And that's the thing I do too. If anyone watches this show, there's the clip I'll tell people to watch is I put it in the playlist of Comic Binge clips, and it's for Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it says two best friends at war. It's something like two best friends, and it's about just disagreeing. My partner in crime on here, Chris Clow, we get into it. We just full on get it. We're like arguing, and you don't see that side of me maybe yet. You'll see it there where we'll go at it. And I'll never forget it. I won't reveal who it was, but a friend of ours, goes, man, I love that. He goes, I love when you guys did that. Because I know people like a good friend of mine would like be hurt if we had that kind of argument. I'm like, dude, I have these arguments all the time with everybody. This is who I am. I just, so there will be when we do this next time, there could be we could be like, rah, which I love. I love disagreeing because I think you would agree. It only strengthens steel sharpens steel, right? Like iron, whatever, right? So that's the thing.
I don't know anything about metalworking, man. I'll take your word for it.
Iron sharpens iron, steel, whatever, whatever.
Sure,
I'm probably screwing it up, but like my point is that
water melts snow, right?
Yeah, right. Well, the thing is,
okay,
but,
there you go.
But maybe through disagreeing, and believe it or not, people can disagree and still be friends. It strengthens your understanding of the other person too, because you start to understand like their perspective, even though you may not agree with it, you understand it. That's the purpose of disagreeing, in my opinion, is the understanding. You don't have to be like, oh, you convince me. People think that the arguing is all about convincing. It's not about convincing. It's about understanding. That's the key. So I'm all about, and that's the thing I look forward to when I get your next pick, which we'll do eventually. But when I get that, and if I don't like it, I want you to understand why I don't like it, and you can be like, "Oh, I get that." Like, you know what I mean? Like that's the part, Or if I give you a Chasm miniseries to read, you're gonna be like,
"Well, let's see." I mean, I definitely, I was like, I'm gonna pick something that he's going to enjoy. I definitely,
fair enough. I tried to do too.
Yeah, my goal wasn't to only get you out of your so-called comfort zone, because I was like, man, Daytripper is everyone's zone, all right? If you just read it,
fair enough.
It's like I think there are books, obviously, that are tougher to get into in some ways than others are. Some things are more accessible, some things are more poppy, some things are more easily digestible. But I also think that we kind of develop our muscles based on the kind of workouts we give ourselves to a certain extent. But just, the thing that you said right at the beginning, this idea of condescension or the idea of like superiority, that's the part that I would say that we both draw the line at. It's like you can have an opinion and their opinion says something about you. It's not something universal. It's not a question of like good or bad or better or worse. It's my opinion. This is not as good as that. And that's just my own filter. And hopefully we can talk about why. It's funny, we're talking about a future episode in which we disagree because in this episode we agreed. So
I know, but it's gonna happen. I know it's gonna happen eventually. Right. I think I have the next one, which it's. Okay. I feel it's safe. Do you have? I could go with it now. Do you need some time to pick yours?
I need some time to pick because I'll do a little bit more interrogation. I mean, I definitely have a lot of suggestions just the way that you do, but I'm gonna have to I want to try and figure out one that's going to be out of left field, but still something you enjoy. That's I've got one. The one I have in mind. I'll just say this. I think I've told you already before, which I think you're like like I can already tell you before. You're like it'll be good. All that.
Yeah. It'll be good.
So it's something that I haven't read.
Oh, I know you haven't read it yet.
Okay. All right.
Trust
all
me.
right.
We're good on that. We're good on that part.
Right.
But
Gore Vidal is already is like he's giving some suggestions here that I know that we consider amongst like the greatest comics of all time. Now, how that is approached by anyone else, because that's so much pressure to put on someone, right? Here, read one comic that I consider one of the greatest comics of all time. It's just like, whatever. What do you expect them to say? So it's almost like I don't even want to give that context. I just want to, maybe I'll even give a comic that I didn't like, but I think you will like. Maybe I'll just put a twist on it that way.
Sure.
Where who knows? I was like, no, it's not. I'm just saying I'll keep you guessing.
Which I want. Yeah, because at some point, we have to eventually take a chance, right? Yeah. We both have to take it, because I can't just be like, what's the artsiest superhero comic I can find? I can't just go that route, I have to eventually go,
what is the artsiest superhero comic you can find? I mean
this off the top of my head, God, probably From Hell.
From Hell is not a superhero comic.
Well, not superhero, no.
No, come on, nonsense.
No, hold on.
No, a superhero comic that's from Marvel or DC, the artsiest Marvel or DC superhero comic.
I meant this comic. I'm sorry, artsiest comic. Okay, hold on. Artsiest superhero comic. God damn, probably. That's a good question. I can't even think of that right now. I'm like totally second guessing everything I'm thinking in my head. Shit, I can't even think. I don't know. I can't think of it right now.
Yeah. We'll have to think about it. But yeah, Gore Vidal did mention Elektra Assassin. So Bill Sienkiewicz's Elektra.
I have not read that
Daredevil
yet.
ones have been pretty like, at least from the visual aspect of it and the way that the storytelling is done over there. But but I know people who hate Arkham Asylum. Like they just hate it with a passion.
Interesting. Do you like it?
I'll tell you what, when I first read it, I was like, I really think this is genius. And then when the second time I read it, I was like, what was I just trying to pretend I'm very smart or something? And then the third time I read it, I was like, I can't decide if it's great or not. So I think I need to read it again for a fourth time. And, they recently had a reprint of the Absolute Edition, and I was just like so close to buying it because it had gone out of print and I was regretting it. And then I still didn't pick it up. So I guess I still haven't decided whether I like it or not. I mean, it's hard for me. I don't know. But that's probably a topic for another conversation.
I know, guys. See, we could talk. I could talk for you for hours. And just for the record,
So I just saw in the comments Adam saying David Mack. So
yeah,
I've every David Mack I've read has seemed to be like it needs me to have my brain and my emotions going at the same time.
And just for the record, I liked Arkham Asylum, but not as much as we did an episode review of it recently. And I like Grant Morrison, but I didn't like it as much as them. I will just really quickly. I do think the narration of Batman at the beginning was really abrasive. I was like, ugh. but I liked it. I don't like it as much as everyone else does. But anyway,
all right. You find me some good superhero comics, and I'll find you some good non-superhero comics for our next conversation.
Our next excursion. So this is again. Thank you so much for coming on. Like this was amazing. This is amazing.
Absolute blast.
I just want to. I can talk forever. I gotta shut the hell up because I'll keep you up. You're way past your bedtime, I'm assuming.
And thank you for everyone watching and in the chat.
Yes, thank you. Everyone who's left a comment, like I love this. Like it's all great. I mean, again, I can talk comics all day, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Is there any new episodes you want to plug that are coming out or live streams you got going on?
Man, I've been traveling and then I had that dental surgery. I'm so behind on my episodes, but I have a box that came for me from the UK. A friend of the channel, a patron, sent me a box of comics, and I haven't even been able to unbox it yet. So I think my next video is going to be me opening that box.
Dude, like I just want to say, like, it's so rad people send you stuff. It's like the ultimate to me when the people like
it's astonishing.
It's amazing. Like legitimately, it just shows you that one, you're a good dude, and like people like you, and like there's a legitimate and people want to do nice things for you. When people do that, that is like, and I've people done it for me too. I won't say people haven't, but like but they haven't sent me a box of comics. That's pretty rad. So like that's
I live in India, so I know how much it costs them to do that. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing. I mean, I'm never going to say no, but I'm always incredibly flattered, and I can't believe my good luck.
Yeah,
but yes. So I don't know what's in the box. I'm going to have to open that box. So maybe before the end of the year, that'll be one more video I can get out as a little, holiday present opening sort of thing.
All right.
But yeah, that's my next next goal.
Yeah, I think we have a Spider-Man show where we're continuing we're going through the Dan Slott run of Spider-Man, and we're got the next episode next week, and then I might take a little bit of a break. We do a show every week, and so we'll take a little bit of break for just kind of recharge some batteries. But then after that, we're going right back into Ultimate Spider-Man review of the last year from John Hickman, and then we got Knights Never Die coming back, and then we're continuing our Superman countdown to the movie coming out. So yeah, go check that out. Go subscribe. I mean, you're probably always subscribing to Angshiman channel. He's the GOAT. I mean, I don't have to tell people to go subscribe to him. They're already doing it. They should be. So, but if you haven't for us, please subscribe. Appreciate everyone already has. And since Cloud's in here, I'll just say read more comics. Akshuman, thanks for coming on. See everyone.
Thank